Alright, so today I want to do a head-to-head comparison of the clown ball python versus the pied ball python. And when I first started in ball pythons about 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't know anything about genetics. I was thinking about breeding ball pythons, and I started going to some of the reptile shows, asking around, hey, which project should I invest in for my very first snakes? And I'd say probably 90% of everyone said you should invest in either clowns or pieds out of the almost 200 genes in ball pythons. There's a dizzying array of a whole bunch of genes that you can actually choose from. So I was like, all right, I'm going to choose either clowns or pieds. I started looking around at the different pieds and clowns, didn't know anything about either gene. And come to find out, there's advantages of both. There's advantages of the clowns over the pieds and vice versa. And today I want to jump over to the internet and I want to show you some of the advantages of each gene. So hopefully you can make a decision on what you want to invest in, either the clown ball python or the pied ball python. Alright, so I want to jump over here at Morphmarket.com, and I want to start with this snake right here. This is a pied ball python, and the pied has big splotches of white all over the snake. Sometimes you can have a really high white pied, and sometimes you can have a low white with a lot more color and a little bit of white on the snake. I'd say this is probably one of the highest white pieds that I've seen. Really impressive looking pied. And when I first started in ball pythons, it seemed like the high white pieds were selling for a lot more money than the low white pieds. Although I think recently it seems like it's kind of balanced out where it doesn't really matter on the amount of white. Sometimes every now and then you'll see one of the old school pied guys selling some of the high white pieds for more money than the low white pieds. But the kind of the weird thing is if you actually take a low white pied with just a little bit of white, you breed it to something else, you'll still produce a mix of high white pieds and low white pieds. It's kind of unpredictable as far as the amount of white on the pied. And keep in mind, the pied is a recessive mutation. So if you actually take this and breed it into something else, say for example, if you took a pied like this and you bred it to a normal, you would get all normal looking offspring, which is kind of the frustrating part of a recessive project. And the pied is one of the few genes it's recessive, but sometimes you can actually see markers on the belly of the snake that indicates it is het pied. Sometimes you can see tracks on either side of the belly, which is kind of the cool part of having a pied, especially if you're working with like a 50% het pied. You breed it to something else and you don't know if you actually have pied in your offspring. Sometimes you can actually see the markers on the belly to kind of figure out maybe if you actually have pied in some of those offspring. It's not 100% looking at the markers. That's the definition of a recessive. You can't see one copy of the gene, although sometimes you can with the pied. So this is the pied and here is the clown. We're doing the comparison between the clown and the pied. And kind of the interesting thing, I'd say probably the first thing that you'd notice if you're just looking at the genes by themselves, that I think personally, I think the pieds are a lot more visually impressive as a standalone gene than the clown. And that's one of the things that sold me on the pied. That's one of the main advantages. If you actually just have the one single gene comparison side by side, I'd say the pied pretty much wins out as far as the visual appearance of each one. But kind of on the flip side, I've actually heard a lot of people say that the pieds can be kind of picky eaters, and I've had kind of this experience myself where I picked up a lot of pieds and it seemed like all my pieds were really finicky, hard to get to eat, and it seemed like a lot of my pieds only wanted live rodents, which I don't really like feeding live. I like to feed frozen thawed as much as possible, and it seems like my clowns were really aggressive feeders, even more aggressive feeders than some of my other genes. And I was actually asking around on a lot of the reptile forums about the kind of the picky eaters of the pieds, and a lot of people had a similar experience with some of their pieds. Although right now in my collection, it seems like both of my clown females are fasting and my pied female is the only one eating. So it's kind of flipped now. You know, sometimes ball pythons can be kind of flipping back and forth between feeding and not feeding, but that's another advantage of the clown. I think it's a little bit easier on average to feed the clowns versus the pieds, although some people would definitely disagree as far as that comparison. So another thing I wanted to show you as far as one of the advantages and disadvantages of each one, it really comes down to which jeans you want to work with, especially if you already have some snakes in your collection and you already have some established jeans that you're working with. Let me tell you, the jeans worked into one or the other can make a really big difference. It seems like almost a polar opposite, working them into the clowns versus into the pieds. And I want to show you a few jeans. We can work them into both and you can see the dramatic difference is pretty amazing. And the first one I'm going to start with is the Super Pastel. So this is actually 2 copies of the pastel jeans. So 1 copy of the pastel really brings out a lot of yellow color in your snake, and 2 copies it brings out a little bit more yellow. You get this kind of a brighter yellow, and a lot of times with the Super Pastels you can kind of get like a faded background, like almost sometimes you can get like a whitish background between the pattern, and it really jumbles up the pattern in a lot of your Super Pastels. So here's what happens if you take the Super Pastel and you work it into the pied. Take a look at this. This is really unexpected. The first time I saw this I was kind of blown away that it almost takes the pied and almost makes it look like it's sandblasted or something, where all the color is like removed from the pied. So I'd say the Super Pastel doesn't really work that well with the pied. It kind of gives it an interesting look depending on what kind of a look that you're actually going for in the visual appearance of your snake. But take a look at this. If you actually take Super Pastel and work it into the clown, take a look at this. I'd say the pastels and the Super Pastels are probably the jeans that really makes the clowns explode as far as a really attractive visual appearance, working them into the clown. So I'd say if you're actually working with a Super Pastel, comparing the clown to the pied, the clown is the definite winner in this case. So here's another gene that you can actually work into the clowns and the pieds, and that is the Orange Dream or the Super Orange Dream. The Super Orange Dream can make some really amazing combinations. So this has 2 copies of the Super Orange Dream, and I've actually seen a lot of people say, why would you work with pastel when you can work with Orange Dream? Because it's so much better as far as combinations. And let me tell you, it really depends on which genes that you're working with and working the Orange Dream or Super Orange Dream into. And I've actually seen some of these Super Orange Dreams that are really super bright orange, and some of them aren't quite as orange as others. There's some really high intensity lines of the Super Orange Dream, and some of them are kind of browned out a little bit. But here's what happens if you take the Super Orange Dream and you work it into the pied. Take a look at this. This is probably the best thing that you can work into the pied. So let me tell you, if you're working with pied, you definitely want to go with the Super Orange Dream, especially working with the high intensity Super Orange Dream. If you actually compare the pastel to the Super Orange Dream, I'd say generally the Orange Dream and the Super Orange Dream is a lot more expensive than some of your pastels, because the pastels have been around for a really long time. They're a lot more affordable if you're actually comparing the pastel to the Orange Dream. But take a look at this. If you actually take the Orange Dream or Super Orange Dream and you work it into the clown, take a look at this. It's not quite as intense as you can actually see in the pied. So if you're comparing the clowns and the pieds, working Orange Dream into the mix, I think pied is the winner. Although I have seen some combinations with the clown and the Super Orange Dream working other genes into the mix to really enhance it. So for example, you can actually work pastel or fire or some of the other brightening genes like yellow belly and really make these colors really pop in the clown. But if you compare them side by side, I'd say in this case the pied is the winner with the Super Orange Dream. All right, so here is the leopard spot nose combination. It's a really awesome combination of genes. As a matter of fact, I did a video on the leopard spot nose, one of the best combinations that works really well with a lot of different genes. And the spot nose and the leopard are pattern enhancing genes that really jumble up the pattern. You can definitely tell on this one, it really just scrambles up the pattern. And then the leopard is a dark gene, so you actually can see it really darkens the background of a lot of your combinations when you add leopard to the combination. So here's what happens if you take the leopard spot nose and you work it into a pied. Take a look at this. This is, I'd say it's kind of hard to actually even see the leopard and the spot nose in a pied sometimes. And a lot of times the pieds, especially like a low white pied like this one, a lot of times the patterns can be really jumbled up. So when you're working other genes into a low white pied, sometimes it's hard to pick them out because the pattern's already jumbled up in the first place. And usually when you work leopard leopard into a pied, usually you can definitely tell because it darkens some of the darkest parts of the ball python. It's a lot darker than you would expect in a pied. But here's what happens if you take the leopard spot nose and you work it into a clown. Take a look at this. This is actually called the Batman, the leopard spot nose clown. One of the most amazing clown combinations that you can actually make. So if you're actually looking at the comparison between the pied and the clown, looking at the leopard spot nose, I'd say in this case the clown definitely wins out the combination of the leopard spot nose. So basically, in summary, I'd say it really depends on which genes you're working with or which genes that you intend to work with. So if you're working with leopard and spot nose, I would definitely go for the clowns versus the pieds if you're getting into, if you have the choice between the clowns or the pieds. And pretty much the best of both worlds, you can actually do this. Take a look at this. You can actually buy a clown pied. This actually has the pied gene and the clown gene in one snake, and it's pretty amazing that the pied dominates the visual appearance of the clown pied, working both genes into a single snake, although you can kind of see the pattern of the clown on the head of the snake, which is pretty amazing. So in this case, you could actually take this, you could breed it into your clowns, you could take the same snake and breed it into your pieds. That's kind of the best of both worlds, getting into the clowns and the pieds. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. And MK asks, I'm picking up a blue-eyed leucistic that was produced from a lesser pastel spot nose bred to a butter fire. What should I breed this snake to? And that is a very good question. So essentially what you have is you have an all-white snake with blue eyes, a blue-eyed leucistic, which is probably one of the most attractive snakes in all of ball pythons. It seems like when I'm selling snakes at the reptile show, everybody wants to hold the all-white snake. And in your case, you actually have 3 genes that you don't know if they're in there or not. There's like a 50% chance that you'll have the pastel, the spot nose, or the fire in the mix. So what I'd actually do is I'd take that snake, especially if it's a male, I would breed it to multiple females you can breed. I'd say usually you're pretty safe to breed up to 3 females with a male. I'd probably make sure that one of those females was a normal so you can isolate the genes. Then you can actually see if you have the pastel, the spot nose, or the fire in the mix. And then when you start breeding it into other combinations, especially if you get like 4 or 5 or 6 gene combos, then you'll know for sure if that gene is a possibility in there, and you can kind of make some good guesses based on what you already know is in the snake. And kind of the tricky part about this one is the blue-eyed leucistic that you have is actually made with a cross between the lesser and the butter, and I usually recommend not crossing those 2 genes. A lot of people are purists when it comes to very similar genes from different lines. So I'm convinced that they're actually 2 different genes, the butter and the lesser, but a lot of cases there's a lot of overlap between the 2 genes, and sometimes you can't tell the difference between a butter and a lesser. So if you took that, you bred it to something else, half the offspring would be lesser or lesser combinations, half would be butters. And I would say in most cases it's pretty much impossible to tell the difference between a lesser and the butter coming out of something like that. So you'd have to sell all the offspring as a lesser / butter. Some people actually think the lesser and the butter are the same gene too, which is pretty interesting. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.